The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the GHG, which I'll refer to as GHG from this point going on. Protocol is a corporate standard and it provides standards and guidance for companies preparing a greenhouse gas GHG emissions inventory in compliance with national and international standards. Now, some countries have already put those standards in legislation, others are preparing to. It covers the accounting and reporting of 6 greenhouse gases covered by the Kyoto Protocol. Obviously, you know those: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. Obviously, the one where everybody focuses on CO2 because it's the one that's the largest volumetrically, but obviously it doesn't have the largest impact on the environment. So the protocol is driving legislation and implementation of measurement and reporting across the world. It could be envisaged that it will become a model for global accountability. Now, you could see that now the US has re-entered the agreement, the global agreement, the Paris Agreement. This will add additional momentum to the idea that companies must take a responsibility for their emissions and be reported and measured and judged on those emissions. So how will this impact a company at an operational level? And again, I'm trying to emphasize here is what does it do to a company that's operating in the oil and gas industry as a provider of best-in-class equipment. There is now and will increasingly be a requirement to measure and report within incremental improvements year on year the GHG data, both on a company's emissions and those products and services that they provide. Now, the way they're classifying these emissions is not straightforward, but it really does focus on the individual emissions of each car, each computer, each air conditioning unit, and doesn't necessarily focus as a priority on product. But obviously, products of a company may produce the greatest impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Those are then classed as scope 3. So those are things which are produced and have a later impact and must be reported. We will come on to this later on, but scope 3, the emissions of carbon not related to your direct activities, but the effect of you create that carbon lock and it is emitted later by a third party. Scope 3 are not reportable at the moment. This is a really important message. Companies like ExxonMobil last week made the decision that not only will they report their internal GHG emissions, scope 1, scope 2, but they will also take responsibility for the discharge of GHG of their customers. So obviously ExxonMobil oil company, they will report the impact of that GHG in terms of all of their hydrocarbon products around the world. And that's a major step forward. So corporately, companies are not only taking responsibility for their own internal consumption of energy, but also the products that they produce. So it will become an increasingly important element in competitive tendering, processing, and the operation of a contract. So this is really where a friend of mine calls it the rubber meets the road. If you do not address GHG emissions, it will become increasingly difficult to operate within a competitive tendering environment where companies are expecting to see, what are you doing about this? How are you going to improve? And do I believe that you're sitting on a very dirty plant in whatever country that produces large amounts of waste and you're doing nothing about it? In fact, I've even heard that you have stockpiles of, let's say, oily waste. And they will expect increasingly companies to have a robust plan. You could say Kuwait, oily desert, pools of oil. You could say that the world is looking to Kuwait to clean that up and to recover that oil. And that's not impacting any environmental fauna or flora. That's simply because you don't want those hydrocarbons being released to the environment or being burnt or whatever, needlessly producing greenhouse gases. So that's an example of how this is going to start.